Penguin Random House Audio presents The Lymond Chronicles Book 3, The Disorderly Knights, by Dorothy Dunnett. Read for you by David Monteath. Part 1. The Saltire and Supporters. 1. Mother's Baking. Catslack, October 1548. On the day that his granny was killed by the English, Sir William Scott the younger of Buccleuch was at Melrose Abbey, marrying his aunt. News of the English attack came towards the end of the ceremony, when, by good fortune, young Scott and his aunt Grizzel were, by all accounts, man and wife. There was no bother over priorities. As the congregation hustled out of the church, led by bridegroom and father, and spurred off on the heels of the messenger, the new-made bride and her sister watched them go. "I'm daft," said Grizzel Beaton to Janet Beaton, straightening her headdress where her bridegroom's helmet had knocked it cock-eyed. "And after 5 years of it with Will's father, you should think shame to allow your own sister to marry a Scot. I've wed his 2 empty boots." "That you havena," said Janet, Lady of Buccleuch, lowering her voice not at all in the presence of 200 twittering Scot relations as they gazed after their vanishing husbands. "They aye remember their boots. It's their empty nightgowns that get fair monotonous." Being a Beaton, Will Scott's new wife was riled, but by no means overcome. The war between England and Scotland was in its 8th year, and there had been no raid for 10 days. It had seemed possible to get married in peace. Creich, her home, was too far away, so Grizzel Beaton had chosen to marry at Melrose, with the tarred canvas among the roof beams patching the holes from the last English raid, and the pillars chipped with arquebus shot. Duly packed like broccoli into lawn, buckram and plush and ropes of misshapen pearls, she had enjoyed the wedding, and even the cautious clash of plate armour underwriting the hymns. Lord Grey of Wilton, with an English army, was occupying Roxburgh, only 12 miles away, and had twice emerged to plunder and burn the district since October began. If the wedding was wanted at Melrose, and Buccleuch, as hereditary bailey of the Abbey lands, had fewer objections than usual to any idea not his own, then the congregation had to come armed. That was all. The Scots and their allies, the 20 polite Frenchmen from Edinburgh, the Italian commander with the lame leg, had left their men-at-arms outside with their horses, the plumed helmets lashed to the saddle-bows, and if there were a few vacant seats where a man from Hawick or Bedrule had ducked too late 10 days before, no one mentioned it. For a while, standing next to her jingling bridegroom, her gaze averted from his carroty hair, Grizzel had thought the other absentees had escaped his attention. Then, as alto and countertenor rang from pillar to pillar, the red head on one side of her leaned towards the unkempt grey one on the other, and hissed, "Da! Where are the Crawfords?" And Buccleuch, the bride saw out of the tail of her eye, sank his head into his shoulders like a bear in its ruff, and said nothing, for by the Crawfords Sir William Scott meant not Lord Coulter and his wife Marietta, or even Sibylla, their remarkable mother, but the only man in Scotland Will Scott had ever obeyed without arguing, Francis Crawford of Lymond. And it was then, as the bishop bored on through the pages of print which were making these two man and wife, that the abbey's chipped door-leaf moved, and a man entered, in the blue and silver livery of Crawford, to speak quietly to one of the monks. From bent head to devout head, the word travelled. Lord Grey of England, guided by a Scotsman renegade chief of the Kerrs, had burned Buccleuch's town of Selkirk to the ground, despoiled his castle at Newark, and was advancing, destroying and killing along the river Yarrow, through the trim possessions of the Scots and their friends. The wedding ended hurriedly, on a surge of masculine bonhomie and relief. 5 minutes later, followed by the red-eyed glares of their womenfolk, Buccleuch and his friends and his new married son had plunged off to join Lord Coulter, head of the Crawfords, and Francis Crawford, his brother, to fight the English once more. Sentimentally, Will thought, it made his wedding day perfect. Cantering easy and big-limbed through the bracken of Ettrickside, with leaves stuck lime-green and scarlet on his wet sleeves, blue eyes narrowed, and fair red-blooded Scot face misted with rain, he was borne on a vast, angry joy. The lands of Branxholme and Hawick, and all Buccleuch possessed in those regions, had been a favourite target while King Henry VIII of England and his successor had tried to resurrect their overlordship of Scotland, and seize and marry Mary, the child Queen of Scotland, to Henry's son Edward, now the young English king. They had failed, despite the great English victory at Pinkie, and timber and thatch had risen in Buccleuch's lands again, and the thick stone towers, his father's at Buccleuch and Branxholme, his own at Kincurd, his grandmother's at Catslack, still survived. After Pinkie, the English army had retired, leaving their garrisons to police the outraged land, and Sir William Scott had left Branxholme to join the roving force then commanded by Crawford of Lymond. By the following summer, when Francis Crawford disbanded his company, Buccleuch's heir had turned into a tough and capable leader of men, and the child Queen Mary had been sent for safety to France, at 6 the affianced bride of the Dauphin. In return, the King of France had filled Scotland with Gascon men-at-arms, Italian arquebusiers, German lanzknechts, a French general, a French ambassador, and an Italian commander in French service, the last of whom was riding now at Will Scott's left side, his Florentine English further cracked by the jolt of the ride. "The little bride shed no tears?" said Piero Strozzi, Marshal of France, in sombre inquiry. He rode with animal grace, a man of near 50, just recovered from a hackbutt shot outside Haddington, which would leave one leg shorter than the other all his life. Beneath the umber skin, the basic shapes of his face were deeply plangent, denying his notoriety as a practical joker. Only Leon, his brother, was worse. But today, riding against the muddling wind, in and out of the rain, his plumes dripping wetly from his bonnet, and the black hair before his eyes in wet rings, Strozzi's theme was the bereft bride. "She has known you some weeks, is it true?" "Grisel, I've known her a while, Marshal. Her older sister is my father's third wife. And there is sympathy between you?" Will Scott grinned. Grisel Beaton had slapped his face 4 times, and apart from those 4 small misjudgments, they had never touched on a topic more personal than which of Buccleuch's bastards to invite to the wedding. But he liked her fine, and she was good and broad where it would matter to future Buccleuchs, which summed up all his mind so far on the subject. "She's a canty wee bird," said Will Scott now to the Marshal. "But plain forby, couldna hold a candle, ye ken, to Lord Coulter's wife. Ye've met the Crawfords?" So duly turned from discussing the bride. "I have met the Crawfords," the Marshal Piero Strozzi said. "The Lord is most worthy, and the dowager mother enchanting, and the youngest brother Francesco is fit for my dearest brother Leon." A smile twitched Sir William Scott's mouth. As Prior of the Noble Order of the Knights Hospitallers of St. John of Jerusalem, and commander of the King of France's fleet off the Barbary coast, Leon Strozzi, however practised with infidels, was not necessarily fit for Crawford of Lymond. Will Scott said nothing, but he wondered why the Marshal Piero also smiled. Sir Walter Scott of Buccleuch was happy too, because he had caught the Kerrs at it again. All over the Middle Borders their land marched with his, and he loved them as he loved the Black Death. It was a Kerr of Ferniehurst whose timely murder had sparked off the Holocaust of Flodden 35 years ago. 32 years ago, a Kerr of Cessford had been involved in a little foray led by Buccleuch, and the Kerr had got himself killed. After that, despite damnable pilgrimages on both sides and eternal vows of reconciliation, despite Buccleuch himself, like his father before him, having to take a Kerr woman to wife, she was dead, the Scott-Kerr feud had flourished. That it was discreetly refuelled from time to time by the English was subconscious.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?